All right, we are being live streamed.
Hit that button. Hey, did you get that little notification screen in yours? It says it's whatever.
No, I don't. I mean, I do on mine. Yeah, the Zoom, you mean? Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny the way it
All right.
goes. Okay, yeah, so.
Okay.
Oh, it says my video is private again. You blocked me again.
Yeah, I don't know why it says that. It shouldn't say that.
I don't know. Try to go back in again.
Like it says it. Can you see the video or does it say it's private?
No, it says it's private. Let me try this phone. Yeah, it's weird.
Okay, there. It looks fine now. All right.
Let's see about that. I'll be the judge of that. Let's see. Where do I find these stupid apps in this thing either?
There you go. All right.
Okay. All right, there we go. Now it says live. Let's see if we can go. All right, now it's working.
Okay.
Fire drill's over. Fire drill's over. I'm sitting in this room here, and it's very dark.
The light looks fine.
It's dark and dank, kind of like my soul. Anyway, so yeah, different location today. So yeah, fix this. We'll be ready to go. Okay.
Morning, David.
And off we go. So very cool, very cool. Yeah. So this is kind of cool. This is cool.
Good morning, Jim and Scott.
I'm gonna wake up, get the machine going today. Somebody is out hunting for Dunkin' Donuts coffee while somebody was still in bed this morning.
Appreciate
it. Yeah. I had to drive 5,000 miles.
Morning, Lynn.
Different location. We are parts unknown today. So, anyways, good morning. Good morning to everybody on this fine, balmy day. It's cold as freaking hell here, and
I know. Yesterday was so nice. Morning, Steve.
No, it's like that tease season where it feels like spring is coming, but you go outside and it's like just cold and windy, and I don't know. I'll be bitching when it gets hot too, so get ready.
I know you will.
So anyway, so what's going on? What's happening with you today? You doing okay?
I'm fine. I'm just tired.
Yeah.
So we stayed at we didn't stay at we're at kind of a house on the beach right now, and the bed wasn't too comfortable.
Poor baby. Yeah, it's tough to be living on the ocean here, but anyway, so that's cool. So happy Saturday, everybody who's jumping on. Hopefully, people had a good beginning of the weekend. Hopefully, everyone's doing well. But yeah,
morning, Lisa.
Pretty soon, Mary. So I'm fine. Oh, hey, what's going on, everybody? Yeah, so we had some fun. We did our Irish Brigade episode last night. Yep. That was cool. It's always fun to talk about them, and it's kind of like, they say everybody's Irish on St. Paddy's Day. And for the Civil War, everyone loves the Irish Brigade on St. Paddy's Day. You see all the Facebook pages promoting their Irish Brigade gear and stuff. They're selling their little tchotchke stuff. But it's pretty cool though. But when you kind of get into the history of it, it's really, I mean, I always like to use this litmus test of like, if these guys came back, what they would see and what they would think. And I think, like a lot of these people, I think the Irish Brigade themselves would be a little bit embarrassed by the coverage they get. And I think people would be a little bit more, I think people a little more cognizant of the fact that their existence was not a good one. It wasn't. No. It was. You see those pictures like the one you have in your background right now, the glorious flag, the Tiffany flag with the harp, and then when you look at this and you study it, it was really a brigade put together. I don't want to say by spite, but it was by for anything but really defending the Union. It was for their own initiatives, and then when it fell apart, they realized that the United States government, the War Department, Lincoln, Washington, all of them in Washington, they realized they didn't really give a shit about them. They didn't. They didn't give them all the effort they wanted, and that's the sad part about it.
Yep. Our conciliary is on here.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Irish. So John Gentili might be.
He just said St. Patrick was Italian, and just like my boy says, no less swept under the rug.
Yeah, John's probably the type of guy who wears orange on St. Patty's Day, probably. You do that, you get your ass kicked in the city. You do that here, I'll tell you that right now. You wear your Orioles gear on St. Patty's Day, you will get beaten senseless and salty. Look up the history of orange at St. Patty's Day. You'll know why. Anyway, but for the most part, though, it's a lot of this where it's really underappreciated, and that's the sad part about it is these guys, because they were I don't know why, because they were Irish, but they always seem to be the first people thrown at the front of the line, kind of like the
Yeah.
fodder,
Yeah.
you know.
It's this is like the one thing that I was thinking about is, again, going back to like Abraham Lincoln and his treatment of the Irish. That's not something that's touched upon in biographies about him. Like you read any biography about him, and a lot of them are like, talks about some of the bad stuff, but not like certainly not the incident, shouldn't even call it incident, but like the bad stuff with the Native Americans. Um, as well as like his treatment of the Irish and George Thomas as well. But I had someone tell me
We
that,
treat every foreigner well here. You know this country, Mary. Come on.
but no, it's one of those things that doesn't get talked about
Mhm.
at all. But I was thinking like it's pretty remarkable that Patrick Clayburn on the Confederate side, who we're going to be talking about in our next episode, was able to rise as high as he did concerning the Irish thing. But I wonder if he was here for longer, he was more established in his community. Who knows,
Well, I think a lot of it was because he was here. He was here longer, and probably both actually. Not to mention the fact that the Confederates really, especially in the Western theater, needed to get any good talent they had. What we
Yeah.
always joke, we always talk about this. If Claiborne had stayed in Ohio and stayed true to the Union, I'm not sure he would have got very high. Because
I started thinking that too with the way
because
the Irish were treated.
because you see the fact that when Michael Corcoran
Yeah.
puts the whole 69th New York together initially. He joins it and becomes their colonel and all that stuff. And then when the war happens, he's put back in power because
Yeah.
he's refusing to march that regiment in New York City when Edward VII, the Prince of Wales, is there, and he gets basically fired. And the war happens, they bring him back to lead it because how good he can recruit. But then when you see when they start to put the whole band together, Thomas Marr comes on board, and they're
Yeah.
recruiting all these, the 88th and the 63rd, and eventually the 28th and the 29th Mass, and all, and 116 Pennsylvania. Lincoln says, "Well, this is kind of cool. We need the men, but you want to be in this Irish brigade. I like where you're going,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to let an Irishman lead it. Ain't going to happen." So they end up going to James Shields, who was born in Ireland, but born in 1826, 27, somewhere around there. So he missed out on the potato famine in a lot of the stuff. He was more American. He was what we would call a wash ashore here on this Cape Cod area, where he was Irish, but he wasn't really considered Irish because he'd been here so long by a lot of people. And so he ends up maneuvering it where instead of being a brigade commander, because the men love Thomas Marr, he's going to end up basically being a division commander and keeping Marr's brigade. So he kind of backdoors it to maintain control, give Washington what he wants. And Lincoln's like, oh, you
I
got
think
me.
Lincoln did it though, because he was like, the duel incident was something that Lincoln was really embarrassed about. Like he told some guy, like, don't bring this up again, kind of thing. Like some guy asked him about it jokingly, and Lincoln was like, got all serious, was like, don't bring
Well,
this up again.
Shields pulled one on him. I mean, he did. He wrote that letter, and he basically gave himself a promotion. Lincoln's like, Shields, like, he said, I want you to run this Irish brigade. Absolutely, I'll be happy to do it. But I'm going to run the division instead, and I'm going to keep Thomas Marr in charge of the brigade. So I'm now a division commander. So we're going to keep Marr because they're only going to fight for him. And he kind of just throws his hands up in the air and says, well, that's it. But at that point on, this is between First Manassas, obviously, and Antietam, because everything falls apart. Corcoran's going to get captured at First Manassas, and he's going to kind of drift away. Marr's going to take over, but then they get absolutely walloped at Antietam.
Yeah.
Right. And then what happens is they half-ass the recruiting. A lot of the Irish in New York City specifically didn't want to sign up again. They signed 30-day papers. After Manassas, they went home. They hated the fact that they were treated. So they go back to New York and they tell all their friends and family in the Irish sections, don't sign up. You're stupid if you do. You'll be treated like a dog. And they all say, okay, well, we're not going to sign up then. And they talk about Marr trying to raise 2,000 men for his brigade. He only raises 250 guys.
Well, he goes back in January of 63 after Fredericksburg has happened, and with the bad press that it has gotten with what the 69th Amendment signed the shorter enlistment were saying, like he's seeing how bad it is. And that's when he starts writing to Lincoln and to Stanton. And sometimes those letters were completely ignored. And other times it was like, well, we can't give you guys leave, and other brigades were able to get leave. So it's really like
Yeah.
eye-opening to how terribly they were treated. Frank's on here. He says, good evening, because he's still in Australia. He said, happy 160th to U.S. Grant getting his promotion to Lieutenant General. And Kelvin said, woohoo, first live I've been able to catch in ages.
Oh
And age
well, welcome,
cool.
welcome back. Yeah, that's cool. And so these guys, they really were fighting for their own flag, but they really every chance they had to for the situation to be improved by the War Department, the War Department looked the other way, just said screw them.
Yep.
And that's the sad part about it, is because when you look specifically how hard they fought, and a lot of their casualties were, I don't want to say, with their own doing. They insisted on using those smooth bores, those 69
Yep.
caliber smooth bores, which only gave you a range within 100 yards for the most part. And you're going up against these Confederates with Enfields or Springfields, and so you really had to get real close range to be
Yeah.
successful. And this wasn't new. When they fought at Gettysburg at the Rosewoods, so the wheat field, they had those same guns again.
Yeah.
So that's what they used. It's tough to imagine that they would have probably at some point turned down more modern weapons, but I think that was kind of the whole deal. That was kind of the pride of it. And when you see within 20 or 30 yards, those smoothbores are very, very successful. I mean, they're like a shotgun. You could,
Yeah.
but when you get farther away, when they talk about, getting to the top of the crest by the sunken road in Antietam, they were 500 yards away. They couldn't do
Yeah.
anything. They're
Yeah.
getting fired upon, in the commanders saying, "Don't fire because it's pointless. You're never going to hit them."
Yeah. Scott asked, just curious, did the Irish recruits get a bonus for signing on early in the war, or was the bonus initiated later? The bonus was later on.
Yeah.
And it was like, I think it was a considerable sum. It was like $700 minimum, and then it went up from there, I think, too. But yeah, that's what they did to get the recruits. One guy actually wrote home. I don't think I mentioned this letter, but he wrote home and said like he had literally it was like that scene in Gangs of New York, literally just got off the boat and was like signing up. And he wrote his mother and said, it was the money. I'm doing this for the money that he signed up.
I mean, very few people in those Irish brigades, any of those regiments, they were fighting for any union. Don't forget, too, these guys they were not abolitionists, these Irish. I mean, a free society of free slaves fighting for jobs in New York City, Philly, and Boston was the worst nightmare.
Yeah.
And we said this a million times. And I shouldn't say unless you, but if you grew up in one of these cities, especially the one we're at here, you'll never understand how hated the Irish were in the 1800s. And now, I mean, people, there's a big St. Patty's Day parade up the street here today. There's a big one in the city next weekend. It's more embraced now. But back then, the Irish were almost one step above dogs, and no one wanted them, and everyone hated them. They saw them as just a nadir of their existence, and a lot of them saw freed slaves at the same level. So now, it's tough enough if you already know you're hated to try to get a dock job or some sort of job digging a ditch somewhere. If you knew you could be undercut by a freed slave, so they didn't care about that. They were literally fighting for getting experience to go back to Ireland to fight their own civil war, and for whatever reason they got guys. They couldn't keep the guys because they couldn't recruit them, and they were right in the front of the lines. They got pounded. It's a tough existence to be an Irish Brigade soldier. There's no question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. David mentioned he lost the feed for a second, and so did Gentilly, but apparently refreshing it will bring it back. We are in a different internet connection today, so it could be that.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully it's okay. We'll keep stick with us and make we're on. But I think it's one of those things where it's a fascinating study, and they're romanticized now, and that's a full 180 from what was back in the day, because they were not romanticized back in the 1800s, and America, like we said before, has never been very open to foreign people. They never really have, but back then, when you see suddenly it's 1840 and 15 20 years later in the city of Boston, now it's 25% of your population is foreign
Yeah.
Irish. And so they were not liked. They were hated. They just it just the reality of that's just how it was back then. Um, and a lot of them did fight because they wanted to be accepted by their American brethren, I suppose, in some
Yeah.
level, but they were never going to get accepted.
No,
I
yeah,
mean,
Freedom Forever asked why were they hated? You know, I think,
well,
yeah,
that was
I don't
we
know.
just said that. That
Yeah.
is just they were foreigners. They came
Yep.
here. They were taken a lot of jobs. They were everywhere. I mean, they just the famine that happened in the 1840s, which is a fascinating study if you're into
Yep.
Irish history. It brought millions of people over to the United States from Ireland because it was either come to the U.S. or starve.
Yep.
And they came here without their without a pot to piss in, with just the shirts on their backs with families, and they're filling, they're coming into these cities and right, the United States was going through that industrial type of
Yep.
phase, those age. They had no industrial skills. These are rural, salt of the earth farmers, so they really had no skills. They were a burden on society,
Yep.
and that's the way they saw it. Um, and of course, they're very nativist themselves. They keep to themselves, so that's where you saw a lot of the Irish gangs starting. You
Yep.
to kind of defend themselves, watch out for themselves. It
Like the
really
Dead
the war
Rabbits.
yeah, the war happening gave them an outlet to do something and
Yeah.
try to figure it out. But it was never a fight to save the union that they care about. I'm sure I'm like, I don't generalize. I'm sure there are some who love the
Oh yeah,
U.S. and
they
wanted
were
to fight
fighting
for
for
it.
different reasons. Like, David mentions immigrants and Catholics were not well liked, especially with the nativist movement that you just mentioned. And you see that in, like, Gangs of New York, not 100% historically accurate, but what history movie is. I mean, we just watched Napoleon the other night and I
Mhm.
liked it. I don't understand why it got the hate it did. It was actually a really, really good movie. Joaquin Phoenix is really good as Napoleon. Um,
Napoleon
yeah,
Bonaparte.
yeah, I really
All
like
right, make sure we're talking about the
uh,
same guy.
yeah, Napoleon Dynamite, also a good movie. Um,
Very good.
but so the nativist movement comes about, the Know Nothings, and that's who I think Bill the Butcher and Gangs of New York, that's the political party he's part of. But then you see him, like, he's got that
Mhm.
Irish guy at one point that was part of the Dead Rabbits become part of his gang. And he,
Yeah,
and the way they treat him, even though he's part of, the Bill the Butcher's gang, is terrible. The way
yeah,
they like this, the names they call them is horrible. It's very, like, just it's terrible the way they were treated. And like you said today, it's like you wouldn't even know it. Um, Cisco mentions industries needed low-income workers who wouldn't complain about bad conditions, and
that's
that's
true if you know how to do it though. A lot of
yeah,
these people were farmers. They didn't know the industry.
yeah,
Not to mention a lot of those low income jobs. There's also other people. For speaking to Boston, you have a heavy Italian population. You have a
yeah,
lot of native people who are here. So those jobs are all fought for by the people who are already here. Now add in a group who didn't even know how to use any of this stuff. And you can see, I mean, especially there's still an Italian Irish friction here today in the city
yeah.
that there is. I mean, it's just you go to the north end versus the south end. It depends on where you go.
What's his name? Whitey Bulger?
Oh, Whitey Bulger. Yeah, well, yeah, that's a whole nother situation for a whole different podcast right there. My grandfather knew him well. We'll leave it at that.
Wow.
So you got to be nice to me.
Roger mentions Lincoln and Gangs New York, where Daniel Day-Lewis is best role. I would agree with that. He was really, like, the funny part about his role in Gangs of New York, Daniel Day-Lewis, is that there's that one scene where he takes the knife and throws it at Lincoln and it lands in Lincoln, like, throws at the picture of Lincoln and lands in his eye. And then 10 years later, he's playing Abraham Lincoln, which is interesting. Daniel
Yeah,
Day-Lewis comes around about every 10 years to do a role. And then he's like,
nah,
I'm
he's
gonna
pretty.
retire.
Yeah, I was going to say. I thought he said he was retiring.
Oh, he'll be back.
I don't know what the hell he's going to do. I mean, what else is he going to do? But I think that's the fascinating part of it is you kind of, if there's one thing that this country still has an issue with still back then is the foreign thing.
Yep.
It's just part of what the country is for whatever.
Yep.
But back then it was a lot worse because there were
Oh
less
yeah.
jobs, and it wasn't like now you can go work at the DQ, Mary. If
Yeah.
you'd have nothing to do with the Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, back then it was in a city like Boston. There's not a lot of rural jobs.
No.
There's not really. So they were kind of a fish out of water, and they were absolutely positively disliked. I mean, you see the old pickers, no Irish,
Yeah.
need apply, whatever. But that's just the sad reality.
Yeah.
But Corcoran was able to, when he came over here, was part of his 69th New York State Regiment. You could join the militia, which
Yeah.
basically meant you were kind of the National Guard. But if a war ever happened, you'd be called up, kind of like it is now.
Yeah.
So he's into that. He gets a lot of his Irish brethren to join, like we said before, under this umbrella, like, let's just learn, we'll train, and then we'll see what we can do taking this back home. And that was always their initiative. But then when the war happens, Corcoran gets put back in command after the whole fiasco with Edward VII, and then he starts getting a lot of his guys in there. In the 69th New York, you've got a pretty strong, tough regiment, and they see the elephant for the first time in First Manassas, and they're thrown right in the friggin' fire. Right? They end up with Sherman, who hated them.
What did you call him last night? Did you say he was an inclusive fellow?
He's a very inclusive fella, obviously.
No, I don't think Sherman would be leading any DEI initiatives.
No, Sherman did not like the Irish. The Irish did not like him. And they end up getting right into the fire. So they're right at Henry Hill House. They're up there firing. And there's that report where they talk about how the Irish, they wore gray coats.
Yeah.
And they were bitching because it was hot. And so but because they had gray, and there wasn't a blue versus gray like there was later in the war, but a lot of the Confederates, Louisianans primarily, took them to be Confederates. So they got up close. And then that meme, then I started blasting. They got up close, and with those smoothbores, because they had taken their jackets off to fight. And there's that story where the Irish basically fought like hell, and they wouldn't shut up. Yeah. They were just loud.
Yeah.
They finally get pushed back. They take heavy casualties. Corcoran is one of 30 or so prisoners who gets hauled off to Libby. So he disappears. He gets released not long afterwards, but he never resurfaces again with the Irish Brigade. He does that Corcoran Legion thing and tries to recruit his own secondary Irish Brigade. But then Thomas Marr is going to take over.
Yeah.
And he's the one who's really going to kind of try to build it. And he has the idea of, let's take the 69th New York and expand it. Let's see if we can get more regiments. Yeah. I can get the 63rd New York out of Staten Island. I can get the 88th out of the Bronx. So now he started to group this together. They try to get the 28th Mass from Boston. Somehow they get the Pilgrim. They get the wrong one. They get the 29th instead, which is basically Pilgrim Protestants. Mm-hmm. They end up fighting with them. Eventually, they do get replaced with the Irish 28th. The Irish 28th, of course, famous for the Fa'a Bala saying. That was their battle cry, clear the way. And then eventually, the 116th Pennsylvania, they get there right before Fredericksburg. So they're able to build this brigade of about 4,000 guys. But the problem is that's their high watermark. And then they start losing guys because of war. Because they're always at the front of the line, and they basically have one arm tied behind their back as far as being replaced, but getting new recruits. So the numbers fall. And we talked about this last night. You start with 4,000 men in May of 62. By May of 63, that 4,000 is down to 300.
Yeah.
That's how many you've lost.
Yeah, and it's like, killed, and as well as missing and wounded and all that. Calvin mentions that Samuel Hodgman from the 7th Michigan Infantry notes in his letters home that the 42nd New York was primarily Irishmen and that the men of the 7th had no better friends than that Irish regiment. And he says, I think it was more common for Western men to be a bit more accepting. So in that Western theater, things were maybe a little bit different. Cisco mentions there were some Irish in the U.S.-Mexican War that defected and went to the Mexicans. Ghost of Sickles Legs says, good morning from cloudy Sterling Heights, Michigan.
Oh, there you go. Oh, the West, in the West, it was definitely different because a lot of people in the West were trying to assimilate themselves, right? You had a lot of Germans out there in the Wisconsin area. You had obviously the native population out there. You had a whole bunch. But here, you're talking about the blue bloods. You're talking about the old guard. the old Boston, old New York, old Philadelphia, and so that was a tough time for them. But yeah, but the Irish, they were loud, they fought, they would just like, I hate to say it, I mean, I'm part Irish like everybody else is here,
Yeah,
but it's
three-quarters Irish.
the stereotype of an army full of Tommy Gavins just punching everybody is not far from the reality. I mean,
Tommy
it
Gavin
just
is the
is.
stereotype. Like for anybody who's seen the show Rescue Me with Dennis Leary, excellent show. But he plays Tommy Gavin. He is like he plays a New Yorker, but he's like so Boston because that's where um Dennis Leary's from Worcester, Mass. Um, but like he's just so stereotypical Irish. I would love to see him do a Civil War show. I think he would be awesome at it.
Oh, you could play Thomas Marr.
Yeah, could you imagine him as Thomas Marr? Dennis
No, I mean
Leary as Thomas Marr.
Thomas Marr. I mean, when he, you know, if you get it, we don't do a lot of Euro stuff, admittedly, but if you study Irish history and you look at the Revolution of 1848 and you
Yeah,
look at Thomas Marr, what he did, um, you look at the Ribbon Men, you look at a lot of these groups that were taking place out there. I mean, you're talking about it's talking 1845 and on the famine era. You
yeah,
have to supply so much food to England from Ireland, and you have to the amount of food you're required to give back is more than you have to eat. So people are starving while watching food go
yeah,
out the door. So of
yeah,
course that's going to cause, that's going to cause all kinds of issues. But it's a fascinating history when you look at not just Corcoran and not just Marr, but you look at the whole picture. But specific to what we do, these guys are the ones to talk about
yeah,
because they brought that theory as a Claiborne did for the most part, but he came earlier.
yeah,
But you talk about the motivations of a Michael Corcoran or a Thomas Marr and what implications it had in the
yeah,
early phases of the Civil War. We talked before when they went to Fort Corcoran in Washington in April of 1861. They did a job that was supposed to take 3,000 men, three
yeah,
weeks. They were supposed to build fortifications. 1,200 Irish did in 1 week. That's how hard these dudes worked. But we talked about the story how they were green soldiers, literally and figuratively, right? And one of them had a lit pipe. He was going to walk into a black powder
yeah,
thing, almost blew up the place,
yeah,
and they had to tell him to stop and stop. So that you're talking about guys who had no experience, but
yeah,
they were hard workers, though they
yeah,
were.
yeah. And I think it'll be interesting to talk about Claiborne next week because there's many things that he has similar, and there's also many things that Claiborne is very different. And I think it's because he did fight for the Confederacy. And I wonder sometimes if their attitude was a little bit different towards the Irish or whatever. But you someone like Claiborne who is like, anytime he was asked, why are you fighting? He said, I'm fighting for my home. Fighting.
Well,
These are
well,
the
he
people where I first felt he said he first felt accepted. And when you think about where he had come from, that he never really felt at home in Ireland, he was always trying to, he wanted to be a doctor and he couldn't because he didn't have Latin. His dad was a doctor. And like
yep.
he was constantly trying to impress his father or whatever. Um, and then when he came over here, his mom had remarried by that point because his dad had passed away. And Claiborne has a ton of step siblings, some of whom fought for the North because they moved up to Wisconsin and that was just where they fought. Um, but he's constantly trying to fit in and find his place. And that's part of his story. And that's one thing, like for me personally, that's why I do relate to Claiborne in that way, is like, I'm an immigrant as well. You're trying to find your place and fit in. And I really I understand that about him, and it's interesting how he finds his home in Helena, gets involved in politics. He does, like, he's a pharmacist, he's a lawyer. One of his best friends is Hiram Granberry, and then the other, who's the Hinman, who was like what, five
Thomas
four
Hinman.
tall, and he was like the party animal.
Thomas Hinman, we'll talk a lot about him in a couple of weeks, but Hinman was kind of like the guy you go to the bars with, but you're gonna, if something stupid's gonna happen. Everyone has a guy they know, right? But that's who he was, and And Clayburn is as much as the idea of Clayburn, you picture him, screaming over a Ringo Gap and yelling for the
Yeah,
cannons. He was shy,
he was really shy.
you know, and so that's why it's a different contrast between the war guy and the non-war guy. But you're right, though. Clayburn was fighting for his new home. He embraced his new home,
Yeah,
where a lot of the guys, they just didn't care. They wanted to go back to their old home. And you
yeah.
can't blame them. They weren't treated very well.
No, no. And I think he was finally treated, and he was part of the British Army as well. But two, he had seen the way that the Irish were treated um in Ireland. And I wonder too if he saw the way they were treated in Cincinnati, and maybe he went to Helena and suddenly he's accepted. Like he joins the Freemasons, he's rises up pretty quickly through there. Um Albert Pike, he knows him as well. Albert Pike was another Confederate general. Fought at Pea Ridge, right?
Pike fought at Pea Ridge with all those guys, with Siegel and the artillery and Earl Van Dorn, the whole fun gang there. Albert
Yeah,
Pike was the one who ran the Indian Brigade,
yeah, that's right.
which was a brutal. I mean, these are the dudes that hunt you down with axe and
Yeah.
scalp you and cut your face off. Kind of like Canadians.
Morning, Tammy. Scott says, interesting how Clayburn served in the English army while in Ireland and he could not take the way they were treated. Yeah, the way the English treated even the Irish in the army was not good. Um, but just like, I don't know, like I'm really looking forward to talking about him because he is definitely like he's my favorite Confederate to study. He's so fascinating. His story is so different from so many others. And just how he doesn't quite understand why they're fighting. And we talked about that with Craig Simons, who excellent biography about Clayburn. Like Craig said, he didn't really understand it, you know. But he goes and does that thing in January of '64 where he's like, guys, I know how we can like get more men. And everybody's like, no.
Well, he was politically naive, but again,
Yeah,
and that's not a knock on Patrick Clayburn.
no.
He saw his job as, okay, as a math equation. What do we need to do to get what we want, which is Southern independence? We're lacking men. We're lacking materials. What can we do to help increase that? Oh, I know. What if we told our slaves, you'll be free if you fight for us?
Yeah.
That'll give us more men. It might give us a fresher men. I mean, he completely ignored the fact of the attitudes in Richmond. Also, he ignored the fact of how the Confederate soldiers would have dealt with that. I
Yeah.
mean, you remember before we were talking before about speaking about the Irish here. They hated the idea of emancipation for reasons we
Oh
talked
yeah.
about a little
Yeah.
while ago. The idea of fighting next to these people too, in their minds, they were not fancy. These were not abolitionists by any stretch of the
No.
imagination. A lot of them fought in the South. We mentioned the 24th Georgia under Cobb. It was by happenstance when they emigrated from Ireland, the boat took them to Savannah, of
Yeah.
all things, Mary,
Up to
instead of
Savannah.
instead of up to Savannah, instead of one of the three northern cities. So what do? They're going to end up fighting for Georgia under Thomas R. Cobb.
Mhm.
And we talked a lot on the episode about that stone wall at Fredericksburg is when they're going to meet guys of the 69th New York and the
Yeah.
63rd New York and the 88th and the 28th Mass and in the 116 PA. They're all going to run into those guys there. And they knew they were Irish. They had their flags shot to shit in Antietam, so they had those boxwood sprigs in their hats, those green leaf things. And Cobb's guys, they had the big flag like the one you have behind you there.
Yeah.
And they knew it was Irish on Irish crime at that very
Yeah.
moment. And if you really study Fredericksburg and you look at the real details of everything that took place within 100 feet or 100 yards rather of that stone wall. Now I know a lot of Marie's Heights has been taken over by urban development, but there's still about 100 yards worth of field leading up to that wall. Most of the fight of the Irish Brigade took place on that grass.
Mhm.
And if you stand there and you see how close you are, now just imagine you're looking straight ahead. You got maybe 50 yards of grass in front of you. You have a stone wall, right? You got the 24 George. You got a bunch of other troops there. Behind that is the hill where the cemetery is now, up where Brompton House is. That's artillery. So you're
Yeah.
being how tough you've got to be to go up the heights to that point and still get to literally some of the guys got right up to the wall, 30 feet to the
Yeah.
wall, some people got. And when the battle was over and Mars guys finally went back down the hill again, a lot of the 24th Georgia literally stood and cheered their effort. George Pickett wrote a
Yeah.
letter to Sally back home about how amazing the effort was. And you could not help come away with an appreciation for the efforts of people who are fighting for a country that I don't want to say didn't care about, but that wasn't their primary goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just fascinating, you know?
uh, Ghost of Sickles Lake mentions Claiborne was a natural leader and tactician, and he had the foresight, as you said, to understand the numbers game. That was the new battle math. Um, and Scott mentions he just reread Simmons' book, and he said he enjoyed it even more after our book club discussion.
Yeah, Craig is a good dude. We're going to have him on again at some point this year to talk about another one of his books.
Johnston, yeah, his biography about
On
Joseph E. Johnston. He's
and
just a
so
good writer, and it was like that was one of my favorite book clubs, not just because it was Patrick Claiborne, but like this is a Navy guy um,
yeah,
who is writing about a soldier um, because one of his students wrote a paper, and he was like, "This guy's cool. I'm gonna research him."
isn't that amazing? You got a really good job at the Naval Academy, and someone does a paper on this obscure Confederate general from Ireland, Patrick
Yeah,
Claiborne, and he reads it and goes, "Wow, this is I never really knew." To the point where the student lit a spark in him, the
yeah,
professor at Annapolis, to write a book about it. I hope that
yeah.
kid got paid, by the way. I hope he
Oh
wrote him a
God,
check for that. Otherwise,
I just I
next time we talk to Craig, I'm gonna have to ask him that.
he was a good dude.
Oh,
He's
he
he's
was a great guy, you know.
he was so down to earth and really like they all have been the authors we've had on him, Tim Smith, all of them. But yeah, it's a really like just very balanced biography. Just looks at him, Pat Claiborne, as a soldier, but also as a human. I love that he puts in the story of Sue Tarleton as well, Patrick Claiborne's fiance. And just it's very, I don't know, like there was stories in that. For anybody who hasn't read it, read the book. It's called Stonewall of the West. And he tells the story in winter of, I think was it winter of 64, where they had the snowball fight organized by Joseph E. Johnston. Um,
I mean,
and-
yeah, those are the stories that are really really cool when you think about it. Is you can just imagine, you know, just
yeah.
the hilarity of it all.
But yeah, and Pat Claiborne is like, his other thing too is not only is he like one of the best the Confederates had, he has amazing subordinates too. Like he was lucky in who he had in his subordinates. Like he had Hiram Granberry, he had Lucius Polk, who was quite different from his uncle. Um,
Mhm.
he had great subordinates. And then, oh yeah, I keep wanting to call him Govan, but it's Govan.
Yeah, that whole thing screws that whole thing up pretty good, you know.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a really, really good book and definitely recommend it to people. Put the title in here. But yeah, we did it for a book
You
club
know,
last year.
and it's too, you know, it's you can be thinking about Fredericksburg now. It's a tough thing when you see. I mean, there's more to Fredericksburg than Marie's Heights. This
Yeah,
Slaughter Pen Farm. There's a whole area, but yeah, if you stand there, a lot of the urban houses have taken. You can still get an idea of what it must have been like. You can still
yeah,
see the stream they talked about crossing. There's a bar called the Sunken Well Tavern
yeah,
that's right kind of down the hill. What they would have marched right through it at the battle, and it's funny. Some of the bartenders talk about how creepy it is at night there, like the
yeah.
talk about ghost stuff, I guess, you know. But yeah, but it's too bad. But there's a lot of Fredericksburg. You know, you can still go up to to a lot of the places that were still there. But yeah, it's unfortunate, but it doesn't take away from the fact when you're standing at that wall and you're looking down the hill of what it must have been like.
Yeah, yeah. It was just a horrific fight. Um, Fulham mentions lots of Irish in the New Orleans regiments. The 8th Louisiana, Colonel Kelly was even a pre-war officer in the U.S. Army. And then Cisco mentions it's a shame regarding Fredericksburg. They let buildings be constructed on battlefields, but developer money often wins. It goes back to as well, like, and we've seen this in Gettysburg. people are kind of getting bent out of shape because they're going to put a mini golf course in. And you should see the comments from people. They're like,
Oh,
no, this
yeah,
is
yeah.
so bad. It's like, if they don't, the taxes are going to go up even higher in that town. And Gettysburg has really high taxes if you live there.
No, well, you got to remember too, Fredericksburg is basically a suburb of Washington, and so
Yeah.
it's really amazing when you look at some of the battlefields. I've said this before, I'll say it again. If you want to see how much effort and battle preservation, how important it is, go onto Google Earth and pull
Yeah.
up Manassas, Virginia, and pull back. South of 95 is all strip malls.
Yeah.
You'll see in the picture, north of 95 is the battlefield. You can see literally where it comes to a screeching halt where the
Yeah.
battlefield starts. And that's because they went out of their way to protect Bull Run. But otherwise, that would be completely run through. A lot of
Yeah.
Northern Virginia, it's strip malls. It
Yeah.
is, right?
Oh, yeah, it
But
is.
but they protected a lot of Fredericksburg, but that area where Marie's Heights is, it's right downtown. It's hard to imagine they were going to protect more than a couple acres because they need housing, they need development.
Yeah.
But the thing about it, you can still walk the neighborhood, you can still walk up, and if you know the history, you can still use your mind's eye to do it.
Yeah.
But at least they have maybe, I don't know if it's 100 yards or so, but they probably got about a couple 100 feet in front of the Union advance of the stone wall. That's, you can still get up there and you can still imagine. And for
Yeah.
purposes of this Irish brigade, that's really where the sweet spot is, because that's really where they were fighting Cobb's guys. So you can't protect it all. It's unfortunate, but that's why you appreciate what you can protect and make sure to visit the place you can go.
Yeah.
But it's still that. I mean, to be honest, Fredericksburg, I mean, Marie's Heights is disappointing when I first
Yeah.
visited, only because for the same things that people are saying here. But I get it. But
Yeah.
you still have the sunken road. You still have a
Yeah.
portion of the stone wall. Brompton Manor is still up there. The Marie House, the cemetery is there where the Confederate artillery was now. You can still see a lot of it. Um, but there's so many places like that you can go, and but there are worse places. Chantilly comes to mind, where it's you know,
Oh, yeah. There's
um,
nothing. There's nothing. But you think about some of them like Franklin that are able to, um, they're able to get more land, which is good, for the battle because not much of Franklin for a long time where Pat Claiborne was killed. It was a Pizza Hut.
yeah,
Um,
I mean that's Pizza Hut, but I mean
yeah.
that's the reality of it all. Is we have to appreciate what we do have and get out
Yeah.
to do these things. But a lot of the big boys, the Antietam's, the Chickamaugas, the Gettysburgs of the world, they are protected.
Yeah.
We didn't talk a lot about the Irish Brigade at Gettysburg. I mean, that was kind of by design. But if you go to Gettysburg, you see that big, beautiful monument and stuff like
Yeah.
that. But the Irish Brigade was a shell of themselves by the time they
Yeah.
got to Gettysburg. They really were. They fought like hell. They in the wheat field. They ran out of ammunition in 20 minutes. They got pushed back. Patrick Kelly was the brigade commander at that point. But you were talking like this the 69th New York was down to two companies. The 68th was down to two companies. The 116th Pennsylvania, who were the newest regiment, they were down to
Yeah.
four companies, so they didn't have a lot of guys. Um, so they have the absolution by Boston College fan Father
Yeah.
Corby. So you had a lot. So you had the romance of it, but they were Willie Mays on the Mets at that point, and
Yeah.
that's just the reality.
Yeah.
But it's still they're obviously Antietam and especially Fredericksburg was really when they were at full banana. But
Yeah.
they really, and that's really because you had a lot of the fact that they couldn't recruit and refill the
Yeah.
ranks, and then
Yeah.
July of 1864, the War Department just basically kills them.
They were like,
Um,
yeah.
they spread them out. They went to the first division of the First Corps of the Union Army, and they were kind of spread out. So they were kind of the Gettys. They were kind of the Irish Brigade in name only. And you
Yeah.
see them reports they were at Appomattox and they were at some of the overland stuff, and they were. But they weren't
Yeah.
what they people
They
assume that
weren't
they
the
were
Irish
what they were at
Brigade.
Fredericksburg, and it's
Yeah.
they
They
still
weren't.
existed in name only. But they if you're going to study the Irish Brigade, you're going to focus on Fredericksburg. You're going to focus on Antietam.
Yeah.
Chancellorsville, they were there and they fought. It was Mars' last hurrah before he gave it the old
Yeah.
quit. He said, "I'm done with
Yeah.
this." But yeah, they fall like hell. It's just a fascinating study when you look at these guys. It really
Oh, it
is.
is. It is. It is. Elsie mentions the slaughter pen is still well preserved, and Kevin mentions Stonewall's line is still well preserved as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
there's a lot of the thing about it is people tend to focus on the things they've lost, right? It's just human nature. But when you look at some of the if you look at the breastworks of Fredericksburg, I'm not talking about Maurice Heights, I'm talking about Slaughter Pen
yeah.
Farm, right?
Yeah.
Like where Maxie Gregg got killed. Speaking of fun lovers, Mary, Maxie Gregg, holy
Yeah.
shit, right? But that's pristine. But you know what though? When we took that walk out there with Ski, we didn't.
Yeah.
There's no one there. You go to
No.
Maurice Heights. Maurice Heights is kind of like the angle at Gettysburg. There's always people there. But
Yeah.
if you want to like go where the rubber meets the road, go to that Meade pyramid and jump the train tracks like
Oh
we did.
God. That was
Or allegedly we
crazy.
did, right? But
Yep.
but you see those Confederate lines, those breastworks, and you still see how perfectly preserved they are. They're probably the
Yeah.
best breastworks in the East. I mean, Spotsylvania is close, but
Oh
considering
yeah.
how long the line is in Fredericksburg, go check that out. Um, but that's preserved. So it's not. It's people say, "Oh,
Yep.
Fredericksburg is so it's," but no, yeah, Maurice Heights, but the rest of it isn't. You know.
Yep. Gentilly mentions, don't forget that Chantilly led to the modern preservation movement. Losing that saved countless battlefields. So there's some silver lining there. Um, the other, there's battlefields in the Western Theater that are incredibly well preserved as well. You look at, Chickamauga comes to mind. I think Shiloh is as well. And they're like, Chickamauga is the first battlefield national park, I think, or first nationally preserved battlefield in
Yeah,
1895, which
in Chickamauga is pristine. I mean, for the most part,
yeah,
it is. I mean, you go visit Chickamauga, you're going to end up getting a real appreciation for a lot of what they did, and it's big and it's vast, and you're not going to see.
yeah,
It doesn't look like you're not going to see all the monuments you see at Gettysburg, for example. It's more designed aimed towards the regiments and things like that versus the generals. Um, but you're going to go and you're going to really appreciate it here in the East. There's only a handful just
yeah,
because of where we are. I
yeah,
think of the Revolutionary War stuff here in Boston. Bunker Hill, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, it's not the monument's not even on the right friggin' hill. They haven't.
yeah,
It's on Breeds Hill, but you can at least appreciate. You can at least go there and you can see an idea of what took place there and stuff like that.
yeah.
But the reality is, the show must go on. You can't
Mhm.
completely um, you can't completely go back and be like historic Williamsburg and then expect to have a functioning town. You mentioned a while
Yeah,
ago the whole thing with that little mini golf thing. It's like, well, if you're going to Gettysburg once a year or once every handful of years, yeah, you want to see. Okay, I want to see what it looked like.
yeah,
But if you live there regularly or you go there a lot, especially if you live there, you're going to need to have some sort of tax
yeah,
revenue. And a lot of these battlefields, you mentioned Gettysburg, the town of Gettysburg is 50% is tax exempt in the whole town because of
yeah,
schools, museums, churches, and the battlefield. So
yeah,
you got to find something. So it's I get it, I do. But considering you're talking about really 1 acre of grass that, yeah, I
yeah,
guess Robert Rhodes guys lined down Long Lane around the corner. But at the end of the day,
yeah.
I mean, no one's complaining when they built the Fourscore Brewery, Mary.
No, 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 exactly.
So
No one complains about the bars and stuff. Gentilly mentions having no economy nearby often leads to untouched battlefields.
yeah, if you look at Sharpsburg specifically, I mean, people. First time I went to Sharpsburg a million years ago, first thing that I was struck by was I got to stay in a hotel 10 miles away because there's no place to
Yeah,
stay. You have one restaurant, you have an ice cream place. But again, and people go there. There's a reason why no one goes because you go there for the day and come out. There's
yeah,
nothing to do.
yeah,
If you throw in a couple of restaurants, you throw in a couple of places and give hotels, people are going to stay. Maybe they're going to see more of the battlefield, but you
yeah.
can't have it both ways. That's the
No,
problem, you
yeah,
know?
exactly. Skeese's Prospect Hill is still the best place to appreciate the Battle of Fredericksburg.
Yeah, that's what you were just saying. I mean, it's fantastic. And when we went there with him, we got to walk that whole line. I've walked so far in my life was that day with Ski, by the
Yeah,
way. So, so they should give you a medal when we got back to our car. That's how
God.
far but it
Yeah.
was a lot of fun. But we saw a lot of the sites that a lot of people don't see, and we walked them. We parked the car over to Slaughter Pen. We walked through the field. We crossed the railroad tracks. I know. We ended up going to the Meade Monument. Then we went up the hill to saw the breastworks and the cannon. And we walked the Confederate line all the
Yeah.
way down. And that's how you do it. If you're
Yeah.
gonna do it that way, because you can get a real appreciation. But like we said about those breastworks, I mean, they're real and they're spectacular. There's no silicone anywhere in those
Yeah.
breastworks, Mary.
God.
But they're perfect because you can really see. And they got the little monument where Maxie Gregg went down. You can
Yeah.
get in a bed, and then when you look at when you're studying the battle, after you've seen and walked the field, it makes, as you know, it makes a lot more sense when you
Yeah.
can
Oh, yeah.
visualize
Yeah.
it. No question.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Some people, or Cisco mentions, places are expensive around Gettysburg, I think, to buy.
Well, I mean, it's the county seat of Adams County, and
Yeah.
it's the only town in that area where any real sort of civilization exists. I mean, there's no, I mean, Biglerville, Fairfield, there's towns around there, but really, unless you're going to go to Frederick, Maryland, that's the next
Yeah.
place that has people.
Yeah.
Gettysburg is going to maintain that sort of place to live, but it's
Yeah.
but it's not cheap though. I mean, it's just not. Don't forget too, Gettysburg is sort of a suburb of Baltimore. A lot of people live
Yeah.
in Gettysburg and drive to Baltimore, so
Yeah.
it's and that's where it's going to get expensive. But that's the way it is though, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Bob mentions too, Cisco liked your no silicone comment.
It's true
Sharpsburg
though.
has,
Natural's always
Bob,
better.
Bob mentions Sharpsburg has a few B&Bs and 2 bars. I was always fortunate enough to stay at my parents' house. Yeah, we have friends who live in Sharpsburg. Well, my friend Laura, you still need to meet her. Laura and her husband Bear live in Sharpsburg. They live in a house that was used as a hospital, which is pretty cool.
No, and you can go there. Sharpsburg's great. You can go to Hagerstown if you're into the retreat from, speaking of Gettysburg, if you're into the retreat from Gettysburg, you got to go to Hagerstown. You go see where the Kilpatrick's cavalry fought against Iverson's North Carolinians. Iverson did survive after Gettysburg. He didn't fall off the planet.
Yeah.
And there are some monuments downtown. You go to the what's the Bear and the Bull. That's the bar right downtown.
Yeah.
That's a good one in Hagerstown, and not to mention Antietam Brewery in Hagerstown.
Yeah.
Fantastic. If you're into the beer thing, but you can go and visit some of these places. But as far as the borough of Gettysburg, yeah, it's expensive because it's a desirable place to be. But there are changes. But truth be told, if you're going to go to Gettysburg and you're going there for like a week, you got to go to Frederick because there's so much to do with. I mean, forget just the Battlefield of Monocacy, which is great anyway. Everybody should go to. But if you're into the bars, the restaurants, the shopping scene, Fredericksburg's probably better than Gettysburg.
Oh, it is. I love it there. And Miranda says it's a great place to live. And then Ghost to Sickles Lake mentions one of my favorite whiskey distillers is in Fredericksburg, a Smith Bowman distillery. Great bourbon made there too.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, and so there's definitely a lot of places to go, and a lot of these battlefields have places around them you could definitely go visit. But I mean, sometimes people tend to be tunnel vision. They're going to go to Gettysburg, and that's all they do. They stay right in the borough. They stay on Steinway. Maybe they go to Diamond. Maybe they don't.
Yeah.
But Gettysburg specifically, and this is the same for all the battlefields, including the Western theaters. Once you can go to Chickamauga, right? And within an hour, you've got Sherman's March to Atlanta. You've got Dallas. You've got Pickett's Mill. You've got Ringgold Gap, or you can go the other way and you go to Chattanooga.
Yeah,
which
is cool.
But that's the thing. There's so many cool places to go. But trying to take this back to the whole Irish thing, they were speckled throughout a whole bunch of different regiments. They were, and that's why one thing we didn't mention was Buster Kilrain in the episode.
Oh yeah, someone just said like we need to do. Frank said he wants us to do an episode about that.
But I mean, the thing about it though is the Buster Kilrain. The thing about that character was those Irish brigades had busters everywhere, and they focused on obviously the 20th of May, but Gettysburg had that one scene with Father Corby, with the Irish guys, that one scene, and even old Hancock himself was there.
Yep.
Protestant guy. He was there and to see what it was about. Um, and you got to give those Irish guys credit for that battle because they first of all that they were supposed to stay back.
Yep.
And they were part of Caldwell's division. So as soon as Sickles did his fun run up to the Emmitsburg
Yep.
Road,
Fun
you
run.
had to bring them in as part of that whole thing. And
Yep.
they fought like hell at that Wheatfield. They really really did.
Yeah.
As did Edward Cross, as did Zook, as did all those
Yep.
guys. But again, you're fighting with one arm tied behind your back because you didn't have the men. You had smooth
Yeah.
bores. You're fighting against overwhelming numbers from GT Anderson. You've got Kershaw's guys just a little bit further away,
Yeah.
bearing down on that area as well. So one thing you can say about them is even with the lack of people, they still fought.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And
Absolutely.
one thing we got to talk about, Mary, is we talked about in the episode was what Marr did after
Yeah.
Fredericksburg to motivate his guys. And if you want to have a really fun study, look at the St. Patrick's Day party of 1863 that Marr put
Yeah.
on for them in winter camp. And that whole thing was amazing. They talk about on certain things and in certain books you can read it, but they always just kind of touch on it. Well,
Yeah.
Marr had a party and they had contests and drinks and the men loved it, blah blah blah, right? But if you look at what he actually did, he tries to recruit. He wants to recruit more men.
Yeah.
Lincoln says no. Must that stupid, right?
Yeah.
Which because Lincoln was not the biggest fan of he was
No.
very nativist, like we said, like a lot of these
Yeah.
guys. So he ends up having to motivate his very down. You're coming off Fredericksburg, you got your
Yeah.
ass handed to you, right? And now you're sitting in winter quarters and things suck and it's miserable. And now Marr says, I got to motivate these guys to fight again. How the hell am I going to do this?
Yeah.
I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get them loaded. So he
Yeah.
ends up making this thing called whiskey punch, this big
Yeah.
bucket, which contained 22 gallons of rum. I think it was 8 bottles of champagne. I think
Yeah.
10 bottles of 22 bottles of
Yeah.
whiskey, 10 bottles of champagne, and then 8 bottles of champagne and 10 bottles of rum. Yeah, there's no water in that. There's no
Oh
fruit.
God.
There's no
No
sours.
juice.
It's just pure alcohol. He makes this big drink for his men, and they're going to have contests. They're going to have, they're going to oil up a pig and they're going to chase
Yep.
it. They're going to have games. They're going to have but the focus, the big prize was the steeplechase, where they were going to
Yeah.
have like a horse race, and the winners got $500.
Yeah.
And they had this big race. And I thought it was fascinating that the judge who
was Joe
determined the
Hooker.
winner
Yeah.
was Joe Hooker.
Yeah.
And Francis Marr himself was the guy who passed out the prizes and did all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it did really lift the spirits of the men. I mean, but he
Mhm.
got them all loaded and it was a big
Yeah.
party. And 20,000 Union men outside of the Irish Brigade all came to watch it and watch this thing.
Yeah.
And you can only imagine how much fun that must have been.
Oh yeah. That would.
But
Sears writes about it.
He does, but he doesn't talk about it when you really get into the weeds of it
Yeah.
to see the efforts this guy did. I'm not sure where the hell he got all that liquor. He must have been over at the apartment, Mary.
Oh, God. We do not have that much liquor.
I'll be ashamed if we did. But no, but he did everything he could. But he's going to finally after Chancellorsville, he's going to be done. He's down to 300 men after Chancellorsville. Admittedly, they were not in the weeds like they were in the other battles of Chancellorsville. No. But he's going to end up quitting, and they're going to bring him back in December of '64 to kind of deal with the West. He goes out there. He's a division commander with the Department of the Army of the Ohio, but he's for the most part done. And when he finally quits, he ends up going out to Montana, the territory, and they're going to make him a governor. And he pisses somebody off out there.
Yeah.
He does something. So because he pissed off people in Ireland too. There's a bounty on his ass in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Someone wanted to put him up the spout in Ireland.
Yep.
He goes to Montana, and not just within 1867, a couple years after the war, he falls off the boat and drowns, and his body's never found.
Yep.
And in 1903, I think it was, somebody came out and said, "Yeah, I got paid $8,000 to kill him." Because there was a bounty on his ass. But it's just interesting guys. But that's what they did. I mean, to mention Corcoran, after he gets released from Libby, he stumbles upon the picket line,
Yeah.
right? I think it was a Ninth New York, a non-Irish regiment, and he doesn't know the password. And they give him
Yeah.
shit, and he starts mouthing off. They bring over the commander of the Ninth to kind of settle him down. Corcoran gets pissed and kills him, shoots him, and he doesn't even get arrested or in any trouble for it. But it just goes to show how some of these
Yep.
people were, and it's just fun reading these stories. Like it's like a surreal, different world. It really, really is.
Yep. Yeah, some good comments on here. MJ said some people will be surprised by how many visitors to Gettysburg believe Kilrain was real, and the person asked where he's buried.
Oh, I get that all the time. I'm up there all the time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you because I wear my little kepi hat and stuff. Where's the Buster Carré wounding site? Sometimes we'll make up a story. Oh, it's down the hill there.
Yeah.
You send them down to the Company B monument. Say it's down there. But yeah, but that's the urban. That's the thing. People.
Yeah.
It's funny. People will remember certain things about the movie. They
Yeah.
focus on Buster.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It is funny. I mean, Gentili's got that great theory that Buster was his horse in the theater monologue, and I do agree with that.
I mean, it's too bad that Michael Shara's not around anymore because it'd be fun to ask him that. Because
Yeah.
that could be that could break the bank on what he was trying to say. I mean,
Yeah.
I mentioned it. We messaged it to Jim Hessler, mentioned it to
Yep.
Spencer Waldron, and the response is always the same. They go, "What?" And they go, "Well, wait a second though." So Gentili might be onto something. He might
Yeah.
he might have figured out that he might have found the Holy Grail here.
Yep. Bjorn's on here from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop.
What is up, Bjorn? What's going on, man?
He says, nerds, love me some Irish Brigade. Who do you like best? I can't say the names. Conyngham, Mulholland. Yeah.
I mean, as far as the Irish Brigade goes, I mean, you have to. There's a lot of different people you can study. I mean, but I mean, me personally, I like Marr. I just do because this is a guy who basically, escaped prison in Australia, was thrown in jail, pissed off a lot of people, came over here, he recruited. I how hard he fought, but I love the St. Patty's Day party in '63 to motivate his guys.
Yeah, that's such a good story.
He did, and then finally he was smart enough to realize after Chancellorsville that something, I'm not getting support from Washington. This whole thing's a joke. I'm done, and he walks away. And it's sad because he saw what Corcoran had created.
Yeah,
Corcoran's going to die before the war ends too. He's going to fall off his horse in Fairfax and end up dying at the Gunnell House.
Yeah.
Which is kind of an ignominious death for him too. But Marr is he was what he was. He wanted to fight, take the war back to Ireland, get all that experience, and it just never happened. But he was smart enough to realize that he was being taken advantage of, that his men were being treated like sheep, and he walked away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when they needed him in the West after he quits, he Irish goodbyes it and walks away.
Yeah.
But then he does come back in December of that year, and he's gonna go west. He's gonna be fighting with the Department of Ohio until he finally says enough is enough, and he goes to Montana. But I think I like him. I just think but there's a lot of guys like that. You could read some of the diaries and some of the sources we did for this episode of like the flag bearers, for example.
Yeah.
And then they didn't even have any flags, but they had flag bearers because their flags got shut up so badly in Antietam. And they were being repaired back in New York City, and how proud they were to be the flag bearer of the 69th New York, which was still like being the red shirted guy in Star Trek.
Yeah,
but they didn't care though, because they knew, and they fought. They did.
Yeah, they were hard fighters. Like the picture behind me, or the painting behind me, I think is Gettysburg. Not 100% sure.
No, that's Fredericksburg.
Fredericksburg. Okay. Oh yeah, I see the tower now. Yeah, so they had their flag there, obviously. MJ Gentili will be reading a public memorial to Kilrain next Gettysburg anniversary.
That's what we should do. Is we should get him to read something. We should have him go up there. Maybe we can pull some strings and get him to be part of the little Round Top rededication here in a few months. So we can go
Could
up there.
you imagine?
I mean, he's small enough to be a leprechaun. We could probably pull him off.
Jeez.
I don't know if an Italian guy will dress up in green, but I guess we'll find out.
He'll be Irish.
but still, but that's neat though. It's you go. We were saying this morning, is like you go on like a lot of the Civil War pages, and everyone's Irish Brigade right now. Everyone's selling flags and selling this and that, and they're glorifying them as they should. But I think as you really get, as I said earlier, if you get into the weeds, these guys.
The
and
glorification takes away the human side of it too.
yeah, I mean, and you know, especially at Gettysburg where they got that really cool the cross monument.
Yeah.
It's really neat, but again, if you really it's they absolutely deserve the monument. That's all
Oh
I'm
yeah.
saying. What I'm saying is that they were on their last legs at
Yeah.
Gettysburg, and they really really were.
Yeah.
And Fredericksburg is really, and especially Antietam and Fredericksburg, are really where, if you're going to if you're going to really focus and trying to study and get your hands around who these guys were,
Yeah.
those, and you're going to look at battles. That's where you're going to study.
Yeah.
But don't forget too, after Gettysburg, the remnants of this Irish brigade, they end up going back to New York City, and they're going to deal with
Yeah.
those draft riots.
Yeah.
Right. So now being you're going into the city. And what do you have to do? You got to suppress Irish
Yeah.
who are fighting the drafts.
Yeah.
So just from a psychological environment, how hard they were, and I mean, you can see why they sent the Irish Brigade there is because you think you're going to calm down your own people.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you go from fighting the 24th Georgia Irish at Fredericksburg.
There was Georgians at Fredericksburg.
There were Georgians at Confederate. Apparently, there were. In case somebody asked, if you're on a tour and somebody asks, the answer is yes. But if you go to, but then they end up having to go try to put down this draft riot. We did an episode of the draft riot. We didn't focus on the Irish as much as the soldiers, but as we did the population.
Yeah.
But just the position they put these guys in constantly, and like the Energizer Bunny, they kept coming back.
Yeah,
they did.
They did. Yeah, hard fighting guys. Miranda mentions it's hilarious how many people have the Sons of Erin flag and do not realize that's a Confederate brigade.
Yeah, the 24th Georgia had a green flag like the one you have right there. They did, and so when people think Bala is the whole Irish brigade too. That's just the 28th Mass. And, but that's if you're Irish and you really appreciate this stuff, there are different things. John F. Kennedy had presented an Irish brigade flag in 1963, 100 years after Gettysburg to Ireland. So they definitely appreciate the effort that they did. But again, it's just one of those sets of people who, unlike the Germans who came here, unlike some of the Canadians and some of the other people who fought here, they really had a real reason to fight, and it was because of the veracity of their leader Michael Corcoran and eventually Thomas Marr, who they looked at. You know who else they loved was McClellan.
Yeah,
he did.
But he treated all the soldiers with such, I want to say respect. And McClellan is McClellan. I like him. I like him a lot more than I used to. He's not my favorite general, but he's.
Well, we get accused of being McClellan apologists.
Yeah, which
is unfair because look, I'll be the first to point at McClellan and just point out the things that I don't specifically like about him. But if you're going to talk about any of these people and you talk about anything positive, it doesn't mean that you're an apologist. It just means you're trying to tell the whole story.
Yeah.
But then again, we get accused of being pro-North and pro-South.
Which is so amazing.
That's the reality of it, which is a pretty good trick to pull if you can do it.
Yeah, it's the two northern, two southern. McClellan apologists just kind of made me laugh because it's like, well, if you listen to our episode, we're trying to tell the whole story of him, and there's been new evidence, there's been new interpretation of that evidence that is kind of putting him in a more positive light. Unfortunately, it's been biographies about Abraham Lincoln that don't make McClellan look very good, which I get that slant, but still he's worth studying. He deserves a second look. And even if you come away from it not liking it, that's totally cool. Like, whatever. I'm not a huge fan of John Bell Hood, but I can, if that's your guy, that's your guy kind of thing.
Well, that's the thing is people get too emotionally attached to these people, and I'll tell you right now, if you went back in time to go meet one of these people, they probably wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire. I mean, in reality, they would a dog, alpha male general type people. But when you look at someone like McClellan and you put yourself outside of I know what happened after, so I'm going to go back but when you put yourself in that position, I mean, you've got Lincoln push these guys to fight at the beginning. And because
Yep.
they're thinking this is going to be a 30-day war, this is going to be a milk run. So why the
Yep.
hell are you wasting so much time in these one of these 68 forts are in Washington when you should be out there getting that ass, right?
Yep.
You should be doing
Get
that,
that ass.
But again, the true military guys knew that you can't take the cookies out of the oven until they're cooked. You got to
Yep.
train these guys. And they went into Manassas, the first Manassas, really unprepared, and they got their asses handed to them. And so when McClellan does take over,
Yep.
he's gonna train these guys, and you can talk about the fact that he did take a lot of time, but in his opinion, they needed that time. But
Yep.
again, but he had his mistakes just like everybody did.
Yep.
But there are too many people who are closed minded, who
Yep.
like to cite your sources, Mary, who don't understand specifically about the big picture, about the military aspect of it all at that time. The Irish Brigade loved McClellan because he didn't. He was the first guy who didn't treat them like
Yep.
war dogs,
Yep.
where like they were some kind of cannon fodder. He
Yep.
treated them as men who need to be trained and they need to be ready to
Yep.
fight. And of course, if your boss is protecting you,
Yep.
then you're gonna go ahead and like them. Contrary to popular opinion, Mary, people don't like to be shot at,
No.
right? You know,
No.
but that's how it is. And so, and he felt you had to be ready. And when they finally did fight it in Antietam, and people don't realize too, people here do, but a lot of people just by the by, you're coming off of Second Manassas, which
Yep.
was a full astrogliding.
Yeah.
Okay, it was. You're going to turn that around pretty quick to really a quotation fingers win it in Antietam.
Yep.
But the fact that they held their own coming off of, and pushing Lee back, that's a
Yep.
huge step. And they talk about, well, he had all these divisions of reserve he didn't put in.
Yep.
They weren't even there yet, a lot of them. They were still
No.
coming.
Yep.
And he did fight at the Battle of Shepherdstown. And so he did a lot of things after the fact
Yep.
that people ignore. So, and then when you look at the successes that came later, specifically under Meade, and then eventually later on with
Yep.
Grant, it was because of the training put forth by McClellan.
Yep.
And some of the people like Burnside don't get enough negative credit because he really
No.
is the one. I mean, and it wasn't all his fault at Fredericksburg either. But again, it's easy to like the guys you like, to hate the guys you hate,
Yep.
without kind of researching all of them. And the
Yeah.
reality
And
is,
without like being disrespectful to them. Like I read something recently where somebody said Oliver Otis Howard makes Burnside look like General Grant,
but the
which
thing
is,
about it though is
I
you
was like,
can, and the
what?
thing is, if you study any of these people, right, any of them, and you look at them and you really look at them, it's hard to come away with finding some positives about everybody, right?
Yep.
And some people don't like to talk positive about certain people because it defeats the narrative in their head they have.
Yeah.
But some of the guys, you can't, especially on social media, you can't say a positive or a negative thing about them because you're wired a certain way for a lot of
Yeah.
people, and that's the truth of it. But you're studying this stuff at a high level when you're kind of seeing the full 360, and you're pissing somebody off
Yeah.
because you're challenging what they think, and they
Yeah.
don't like that too much.
No.
You know,
No, they don't. And we've all run into that kind of thing. Like especially with, a couple of weeks ago with Oliver Otis Howard, this stuff that was just factually wrong about him. Including some of what was written about his post-war career. And luckily, like I stayed away from it. But like, it was good to see some people saying, no, this is what happened. Like, in our episode, we talked about the corruption in the Freedmen's Bureau. And this person was laying blame completely on Howard for that. It wasn't completely him, it was his subordinates. It was also the Freedmen's Bureau Bank, which was really corrupt. But too, the one person that did not get mentioned was Fernando Wood. And yes, MJ defended Howard, which was awesome. She did a really good post about the Hancock Howard thing that happened on East Cemetery Hill, kind of debunking that myth. But when you're talking about, here we go on Howard again, when you're talking about Howard and the Freedmen's Bureau, you have to bring up Fernando Wood and the personal vendetta that man had against Howard. because Howard was an abolitionist and Fernando Wood most definitely was not an abolitionist. And he
No.
took the Freedmen's Bureau, found out what was going on, and he ran with it. And he did it twice to Howard. And Howard finally was like, fuck it, just fuck it, can't do it anymore. And that's why they sent him out west, because he had to get away from the corruption and just what was happening to him. And Fernando Wood was relentless. And the thing that doesn't get talked about is that side of it. And that puts a whole other light on what happens. I'm not defending Howard saying he was perfect at all, but and yes, there was corruption in the Freedmen's Bureau, and yes, he was probably involved in it.
Well, there was corruption, there was coercion. I mean, you're talking about volunteers who are going out with this Freedmen's Bureau who are being physically threatened, by people who don't like what they're doing. And most people, like I said before, they don't like being shot at. No. And if you're a volunteer and you're certainly not getting paid for it, well, what the hell am I doing here? You could have the biggest heart in the world of trying to help as many people as you want.
Yeah.
But you want your heart to keep beating at the end of the day. And I mean, I've not seen anything with Howard himself being corrupt personally.
No.
But the thing about Howard, since you got going about him now, is he's an easy guy to pig pile on.
Yep.
And they take the Chancellorsville narrative and they build on that. And the stupidest thing was his alleged throwing Doubleday under the bus, right?
Yes.
When he writes it, you read his letters when he immediately writes one sentence saying, Doubleday's men fell back. And there are some people out there who seem to think that is throwing him under the bus by simply saying, he didn't say Doubleday sucks. He didn't say whatever. He just literally said his men fell back. But there are people who don't like Howard who take that as some sort of indication of him throwing him under the bus. And that's
lying about it. Like he was like, I've seen Howard accused of being a liar. Well, tell me who didn't lie back then about stuff. Fat Feline, I love the name, said it's difficult to criticize Howard because his personal character was so good, but militarily it took me a long time to have any respect for him otherwise. And I was the same way. There was a long time I didn't have, I was like, haha, he ran at Chancellorsville, look at him, he sucks at Gettysburg kind of thing. But then I started looking more at it. And he's not perfect. He is not the greatest general the Union Army had by any stretch, but he is a person who learned from his mistakes, was very respected in his time, was very much an abolitionist at a time when it was not good to be an abolitionist, to the point where he got the shit kicked out of him at West Point.
Well, I mean, he also had the Bible thing, which rubbed people the wrong way. Yeah. But he also, looking what James Shield experienced, the Irish Brigade, he's now replacing a Franz Siegel. Replacing, not every one of the 11th Corps guys are German, but a lot of them are German.
Yeah.
Now you go from the guy of your own country who's kind of more of a fun type of person you can respect, to a Bible thumping non-German. So they're not the first person to hate their boss, right? And so it goes on and on and on. But I mean, the Chancellorsville thing and when you talk about the flank at Chancellorsville, instead of talking about how pathetic Howard was, you have to talk about how good Jackson was.
Exactly, and that's one thing that doesn't get talked about.
The same people. Here's the thing too: the same people who rip on Howard at Chancellorsville are the same people who rip on John Bell Hood at Spring Hill, when they really should be giving credit to Schofield for getting past him versus Hood being asleep at the switch. Now, again, Hood, there was a lot of stuff that came out of Spring Hill that led into Franklin. But again, sometimes you give credit to the winner and not pig pile on the loser. I mean,
exactly.
as much as the 1980 Olympic team, they beat the Russians, right?
Yeah.
People glorify that team. No one talks about the fact, no one says the Russians choked, right? They say how greatly it was a miracle, but that's the thing. People focus on the negative.
Yeah.
And we've said before that nobody was going to hold that flank at Chancellorsville.
Nope.
But the lazy academics are the ones who blame him for Gettysburg. Yeah, and that's the problem too. And again, it's easy to pig pile, and that's the problem.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's going with the Stephen Sears narrative. It's going with picking and choosing your primary sources and not looking at what the guys actually are saying about it. Like Elsie mentions, it's funny how certain notions still stand that have been corrected or at least swinging in the other direction. Had to educate a person about Slocum the other day, but they didn't want to hear it. I've had to like come to Slocum's defense too, like saying he's like,
Yeah.
people say he's lazy, and it's been like, there's been stuff found now that show that he wasn't. He was, and he had that reputation in the Civil War himself. He and Howard were pretty good friends. And it's funny, you read Howard's account of Bentonville, and he makes fun, like he says something's like Slocum got there before me. Like he makes a joke about it. So Slocum had the reputation. But like, the thing with studying these individuals is like, be open-minded about it. I, used to not like Rosecrans,
No.
but then I read more about him and I'm like, wow, this guy is really good. Um, but that, like, for me with Howard, it was very much a situation where I like was like, who's this guy? He's such a joker. And then I started reading more about him. And really, obviously, I've certainly come around point where I have his signature tattooed on my arm, but he is such an interesting study because he most certainly is not perfect. None of them were. Um, he's very self he is self-deprecating in his memoirs. He's very humorous. And that's the one thing I found a really cool quote. Someone gave a speech about
Mm.
him a year after he died at Lincoln Memorial University, which he helped found. And he said that, at the time, Howard's reputation was starting to kind of turn negative. And it was said, that he was, it's often said of him that he's quiet and very reserved. And this guy knew Howard personally. And he said, you could not have met, the guy was funny, like not like sarcastic, but just that, I think that main sense of Mainer kind of sense of humor, self-deprecating. He could make the room laugh by cracking a joke kind of thing.
Well, I think the problem is people look at Howard, they focus more on the self-defecating than the self-deprecating with him, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. But if you want to look at some of the generals, I mean, no one, what's so funny? When was the last time you were stumbling around on your Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And someone went off about how pathetic George Sykes is or was.
Yeah.
Because when you're looking at a lot of these generals, look at Bristow Station. If you want a real situation of a Union Corps commander falling on his face, but again, it's not a big battle, it's not a gigantic battle, so people aren't going to focus on it. But he might have been, when you're looking at the big 7 Union generals at Gettysburg, he's probably the worst one, including Sickles, if you really think about it.
Yeah.
There's a reason why he doesn't have a statue at Gettysburg.
Yeah. Oh, Sykes is, yeah. Calvin mentions, and we've talked about this many times. Calvin says, I brought up the potential of Rosecrans suffering from PTSD, and a lot of people are not having that still. We've run into that too, and we 100% agree with you. I definitely think Rosecrans was suffering from PTSD, especially at Chickamauga, and I think that's why he had a breakdown.
Well, it's hard to try to look at him, a guy who had one of the most brilliant campaigns in the Tullahoma campaign, to suddenly forgetting how to be a general. I mean, he had a situation where Garrosh was killed in front of him. He had a situation where he does well at Spring Hill. He had Tullahoma was fantastic. They could beat Chickamauga Millie, but he ends up suddenly forgetting how to be a general. So it's tough to diagnose somebody 160 years later, but it seems to me anyway that if you're reading the tea leaves, that the tread on his mental tire went flat and he had PTSD.
And you know what, if that's not your opinion, that's fine. But I had somebody, shockingly on a Facebook page that said, like, he absolutely did not, how dare you say, like, they were offended. And I'm like, well, it doesn't make him less of a person. Right. Tell me who went through that war and didn't come away with having changed, something about them. And for we did an episode about Rosecrans. And the thing with it is this, Stones River, his best friend is Garrosh. Garrosh is on his staff. Garrosh gets his head blown off right in front of Rosecrans. Rosecrans goes around for the rest of the battle with his blood all over him.
His brains too.
Yeah, his brains. Like it, and he just kind of, I think at that point you're like, well, the adrenaline is kicking in and all that. And Rosecrans, for the rest of his life, carried around the buttons from that jacket in his pocket. That death affected him. And you can see it really starting. And Chickamauga, he does, he's going off like no sleep. He's stressed about his army because he's got to literally leapfrog them back to Chickamauga because they're too spread out. It's a lot like Lee in a way at Gettysburg. He got arrogant. But I think Chickamauga, the breakthrough, that was it, because he was not the same Rosecrans you see at Tullahoma.
He's one of those rare people where you could see it flip, right? You could see it. He has this Antonio Brown moment after Chickamauga. There's no question. He becomes a different guy. And of course, he's got that political rivalry with U.S. Grant. That's going on at the time. And then it turns into the Grant people who are going to dismiss everything with that Rosecrans did or it happens, to the point now where if you go to one of these Grant people and you talk about that Rosecrans did well, it's an affront to them.
They're offended. I had somebody tell me, like, I do believe that Grant somewhat stole the idea for was it Cracker Line or Brown's?
Yeah, the Cracker Line, and that's the thing too, is Grant did implement it by a lot of counts. It was the idea of Rosecrans.
Yeah.
And the thing about it, here's the thing, it doesn't take away from Grant. It doesn't. But again, you can't give any sort of credit in that situation because people I've seen you step in it. No one steps in it more than you on social media. And sometimes it's fun to sit back and popcorn and watch you dig yourself into a hole, but you're not doing it. But you're not wrong. But you're fighting an uphill climb where you're going against what people think and felt for their entire lives, and now you're asking them to change.
Yeah,
some Canadian girls make me change. Come on now.
Top of that, a girl talking military.
But again, you're fighting. You're swinging up against stream with a lot of people, and I could tell you. We've talked about this offline. Some of our friends are talking about this offline. I can name 5 or 6 people that we know who are, no matter what happens, they're going to hold on to that point of pure stubbornness, like grim death, and never let it go. Despite the fact of contrary evidence, they're going to hold on to it. It's because what they think, and they hate the idea that maybe, just maybe, I might be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? And I tell them, hey, even Lee admitted he was all his fault at Gettysburg. Right?
Yeah.
So you can change. Everybody changes. It's part of learning. But again, that's who you deal with, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Bjorn mentions that Sykes was on duty in Western Kansas in late 1864, and his health was totally broken. He caused Samuel Curtis all sorts of problems because he just wouldn't take leave. Yeah.
I mean, Sykes is someone who, he gets put in charge of the 5th when Meade moves on to the big chair. Yeah. And he really, like we like to call Gettysburg 2.0, that leads up to Bristow Station. If you read, after that, after the 11th and the 12th gets shipped out west, and they're down in that Culpeper V area, and you look at how Lee really played Meade, and no one really studies or talks about that how Meade was couldn't sleep at night worrying about Robert E. Lee, and Lee was in his head. Yeah. How badly it led to the Battle of Bristow Station because of George Sykes. Yeah. When he's like that SpongeBob meme, I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna get out of here. Yeah. He's going to take off, and he's told to stay there and wait until he gets relieved, and he takes off, and he doesn't get enough negative credit. He really doesn't.
No. Who's the guy that took off from Donelson? He had a "my people need me" moment.
Oh, John Floyd.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was smart though, because Floyd knew that he in his mind, his head was going in the noose, because he's a guy who was selling weapons in the Confederacy while he was working in the Union. So they're like, well, I can't stick around. My ass is grass if I stay here. Pillow. Well, screw this. I'm leaving too. Yeah. And guys like Hiram Granberry get stuck staying behind, get caught, get sent to Boston. Yeah. But that's the fun part about it.
Yeah. You ready to jump off soon?
Yeah, we can jump off. It's 11:30. We're sort of doing a little quasi vacation weekend about 5 miles from our house. Right, we have a house right on the ocean here, which is pretty cool. And so we'll definitely take care of that. So we're going to be doing the episode on Clayburn next week or two. So we'll get that going. So we'll have to
Yeah.
dust off the notes from our meeting with Craig Simons. That'll be cool.
Yeah.
And then we still got to schedule book club. We still got to schedule
Yeah.
another roundtable coming up here pretty soon
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. But next roundtable though is probably going to have a theme. We talked about, remember? We were going to talk about
I don't
myths of the
listen,
Civil-
remember?
You were the one that said we should do that for the roundtable, myths of the Civil War. What are some
Oh, that's right.
you know, just talking about not necessarily myths, but things that, you know, maybe you believe, not believe, but just stuff that like seems to stick around a lot and has become like a myth, but people don't want to break away from that.
Like Lost Little 191, you mean?
Yeah.
Like Hancock and Howard at Cemetery Hill?
Fighting at Cemetery Hill. And it's like the two of them said we didn't fight. And then people are like, oh no, but you did. And they're like, no, we didn't.
Like the drinking water at Spangler Spring together?
Yeah.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, and just too, not necessarily that, but like just kind of this whole thing that Rosecrans wasn't a great general, and where that kind of where the myths come from, and why, all that.
Dare we talk positive about Braxton Bragg? I don't know. We'll find out. We can definitely all agree that Cesnola sucked, though, right?
Until he's gonna like drive here and kick your ass.
I'm just kidding.
Remember we said we were going to talk about him in that episode, and then remember we were hanging out with John, and he's like, "You never did mention him again."
I know. We owe him some love. We talk a lot about the about Cesnola, about the we got to do something about the Italians. We have to talk about that. We'll have some fun with that.
Bring John Kelly on to talk about it.
Oh, he's going to be our buster. We should have had him on for the Irish Brigade episode. Have him sit there like a little leprechaun. It's so friggin' bad. He's going to kill us, I'm telling you. It's a matter of time.
Yeah.
All right. Why don't we jump off? It's coming around a high noon. We're a few minutes early, but it's okay. Yeah. We'll get ready to go. Give people some time. So we appreciate you jumping on. These are always fun. This is fun to talk about this. If you haven't listened to the episode yet, please do, because I think it's a good, even if you don't care one way or the other. Most people like the Irish Brigade. Yeah. But when you go online or you read books, they tend to talk about the battles. You tend to talk about the 69th, the 63rd, the 88th, the 116th, the 28th, and 29th. That's great, okay? Yeah. But the fascinating part about the Irish Brigade is how they were formed. Yeah. Like anything else, is the sometimes the journey is better than the destination. Yeah. And that's really what we really focused on, was the history leading up to it. So hopefully you listen, hopefully you like it. Just shoot us a message if you do. And we'll do the Confederate version for St. Patty's Day on Patrick Clayburn in a couple of weeks with Balance of Scale.
And it's his birthday next weekend too.
That is true. But all right, guys, everybody have a great weekend. We're going to jump off. So hopefully have a fantastic weekend. We got some stuff to do this afternoon. Hopefully you do as well. Hopefully it's warmer and drier. It's just crappy cold right now. Hopefully it's warm where you're at. So anyway, so off we go. Mary, any final words from you, Finchero?
Well, thanks for bringing it like you always do with the episode. And thanks for everybody for your support, for coming on here with the silly little thing we do on weekends. We really appreciate it.
It's a lot of fun. We definitely appreciate
just shout out to Bjorn at Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. Be sure to like the page on Facebook. They do a lot of great live streams. They have a lot of amazing stuff there, not just books, but cool, like just lots of cool stuff there. And I think they're
speaking of our friends, Mary, I'm going to be enjoying a Getty's Gear cigar here in a few minutes.
Yes. Oh, yes. And be sure to get to, if you're in Gettysburg, get to Getty's Gear. They've got like awesome coffee, awesome cigars, and they've got dog treats and cat treats. So they're pet friendly.
Yeah, today feels like a bourbon day, I think. So I think we're going to have some fun with this. I think we're going to have to do it. So, all right, guys, have a great weekend. Again, we really appreciate you jumping on and the support you guys do. This is great that we're doing this. So
we would not be able to do this without
episodes
you.
of the book. So yeah, so off we